Hi guys, welcome back. Today we're gonna be talking about pollution. So first, let's start by defining pollution. Pollution is basically the introduction of harmful materials, and we call these materials pollutants, into the environment. Why is it important to talk about pollution? Because pollution affects us as humans and it affects our nature. So it affects ecosystems and all living things. First, we're going to begin by defining the three different types of pollution. So we have air pollution, land pollution, and water pollution. And from their names, air pollution is when we release pollutants into the air, land pollutions into the land, and water pollution into water. We're going to first start talking about air pollution. So, we said it's when we release pollutants into the air. The main source that leads to air pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. So, when we burn fossil fuels for energy, such as in factories, the gases that are released are a combination of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon dioxide, and unburned hydrocarbons. And soon in the video, we're going to be looking at how each gas released leads to air pollution and its effect on the environment. Now, also, another source of air pollution is the release of chlorofluorocarbons, which are used in refrigerators, air conditioners, and aerosol sprays. And their effect, the CFCs, is that they contribute to ozone layer depletion. Now, what is the ozone layer? The ozone layer is a gaseous layer that protects the Earth from ultraviolet radiation, which comes from the sun. So when this layer is depleted, we're gonna have more UV entering the Earth, which is not good. It causes damage. So first, we're gonna be talking about the effects of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide. So we already mentioned how we get these gases. It's when we burn fossil fuels. Now, these gases, when released into the atmosphere, they are going to react with water vapor, oxygen, and other chemicals that are found in the atmosphere. What's going to happen after they react together? We're going to have the formation of sulfuric acid. That's when sulfur dioxide reacts with water vapor, oxygen, other elements. And we might also have nitric acid, and that's when nitrogen dioxide reacts with water vapor, oxygen, and the other elements. So when these two acids are formed, they mix with rainwater and then they fall as acid rain. Now, why is acid rain dangerous? Because it destroys trees, it harms aquatic organisms as it decreases the pH of the water they live in, and it can also erode buildings. So now we talked about the effects of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, which includes nitrogen dioxide. Next, we're going to be talking about carbon monoxide. So, carbon monoxide, what is the source of it? The source of it is burning carbon containing compounds under low oxygen conditions. Now, when carbon monoxide is released, what's going to happen? So, before we talk about what's going to happen, we need to first understand something is that our red blood cells they have hemoglobin. Okay, this hemoglobin is going to bind to oxygen and that's how oxygen is going to be transported through our body. Now, what the problem is that carbon monoxide can bind to hemoglobin better than oxygen. Now, if carbon monoxide is binding to hemoglobin better than oxygen, oxygen won't be transported at a high amount anymore. Instead, carbon monoxide is going to be transported, and this is dangerous. This can lead to headaches, dizziness, nausea, breathing difficulties, and also in severe cases, it can also lead to death by suffocation as there is no oxygen being transported to your body, it is carbon monoxide. Next, we're going to be talking about photochemical smog. What is photochemical smog? It's basically the combination of smoke and fog. How does it happen? It happens as a result of a reaction between sunlight and other pollutants in the atmosphere. These pollutants are nitrogen oxides and unburned hydrocarbons. So, nitrogen oxides, we already mentioned before, they come from the burning of fossil fuels, while hydrocarbons mostly come from the incomplete combustion of petroleum. So, these gases are going to react and they're going to form a photochemical smog. Now, what are the dangers of this photochemical smog? It's that it causes irritation, it causes breathing problems, and it can also reduce lung function in the long term. Now, we still have to talk about carbon dioxide, we didn't talk about it, and we still have to talk about one more function of the CFCs. This takes us to the greenhouse effect. So, what is the greenhouse effect? So, we all know that the Earth needs the sun to keep it warm. So, the sun is going to send out rays, and these rays are going to be, some of them are going to be reflected back, and some of them are going to be absorbed in order to keep the Earth warm. Now, we have gases that help the Earth to absorb some of the radiation or some of the sun rays, and we call these greenhouse gases. And these greenhouse gases are combined of carbon dioxide, methane, and CFCs. Now, the greenhouse effect is good to a certain extent. So it's important to keep the earth warm. However, when we have the release of too much carbon dioxide and too much methane and too much CFCs, which are all greenhouse gases, we're going to be moving to something what we call as enhanced greenhouse effect. What is the enhanced greenhouse effect? We're basically trapping more heat on Earth. So instead of reflecting, so we said that the Earth reflects some and absorbs some. Now in the enhanced greenhouse effect, we're reflecting very little and we're absorbing much more. So what's going to happen if we're going to absorb much more heat and keep it on Earth? This is going to cause an increase in the temperature of Earth. So what does that lead us to? That leads us to global warming. And what are the dangers of global warming? So if the Earth's temperature is going to rise, this is going to cause the melting of the polar ice, which causes rising sea levels. It's going to cause more extreme weather. It's also going to cause threat to wildlife, food and water shortages, and also it's going to cause health risks. Now, we finished talking about air pollution, but there's just one more thing I want to say about air pollution before we start land pollution is nuclear pollution, which is basically the release of radioactive materials from nuclear power stations, and these radioactive materials are going to cause radiation sickness, burns, and also leads to genetic mutations that can cause cancer and birth defects. Okay, now we finished everything talking about air pollution. Now we're gonna be talking about land pollution. So, first, to understand land pollution, let's begin by understanding why it started. So, as the earth is getting more populated, so since we have a larger population, we need to feed this population. So, the demand for food has been increasing over the past years. And this puts pressure on farmers to produce more food and faster period of time in order to be able to feed all the population. So the methods that they used are heavy machinery, monoculture farming, the use of pesticides, insecticides, and fertilizers, and also selective breeding and mechanized agriculture. All of these work to increase the yield of the food production. However, these factors, when they're used in excess, they could cause land pollution. And now we're going to be seeing how. So first, the use of pesticides and fertilizers. So pesticides, just a quick definition, they are chemicals that are used to kill pests that feed on the plants. Okay, and we can split them into two: insecticides, which kill the insects, and we have herbicides, which kill weeds, and weeds are unwanted plants. Okay, and we also have fertilizers, which are minerals that help the plants to grow faster and to produce more fruits. However, when these are overused, they are going to contaminate the soil and they might also seep into nearby land and water sources, so they can also cause water pollution, which we will be seeing later on. Now, also, heavy machinery is going to compact the soil, and once it does that, it's going to reduce its ability to absorb water, and basically, it's going to cause the soil to erode. Now, we also have monoculture farming. So, what is monoculture farming? Monoculture farming is basically when you plant one type of plant only on this land. Now, although this might be good to increase the yield, however, it's going to exhaust specific nutrients from the soil, so it's going to deplete it from its nutrients. We're going to have to use more pesticides and more fertilizers, and we already said how these contribute to pollution, and it's going to also reduce the biodiversity. So remember when we talked about biodiversity having a wide variety of different living things? Now, if we're only planting one specific type of plant, of course, this is going to reduce the biodiversity. Now, also selective breeding. Selective breeding is basically when we come and we select different plants based on their characteristics and we breed them together in order to have a higher yield and a higher production. This also reduces genetic diversity because if I'm selecting which one I want, I'm forgetting about all the rest, and this will decrease the genetic diversity. So reducing the genetic diversity makes them more vulnerable to disease, which also eventually leads to more pesticide use. Now, also, mechanized agriculture, which is using tractors, will cause soil destruction, and even these large vehicles may leak oil. Also, we have overgrazing, deforestation, and soil erosion. So, soil erosion is basically when the top layer is washed away and it reduces the land productivity and it becomes like a desert. The main factors that lead to soil erosion are overgrazing, and that's when animals feed on the land more than it's able to grow. So the feeding on the land outpaces the ability of the land to grow. And deforestation, which is basically, we all know what deforestation is, cutting down trees in order to build for urban purposes. And this, of course, if we're removing trees, remember trees play a very important role in the ecosystem as they hold the soil together, they produce oxygen, and so on. So removing all the trees is going to worsen pollution and will also cause soil erosion. The effects of soil erosion, of course, and the effects of deforestation and everything, we know that many animals live on trees. So destroying all the trees will cause habitat destruction. This could cause the extinction of some species, which leads to reduced biodiversity. Now moving on to water pollution. So from its name, water pollution, when we throw pollutants into the water, we have what type of waste can be released into the water. We have industrial waste, which is from factories. If factories are placed near water sources, some of their chemicals can leak and heavy metals leak into the water and they're going to kill marine life. We also have agriculture runoff, which we'll be talking about later on as we mentioned it earlier. We have sewage disposal, so the disposal of untreated sewage, untreated waste into water sources. We have oil spills, and we also have plastic and solid waste, and more importantly, the non-biodegradable trash, which harms marine life. So we have two types of waste. We have biodegradable and non-biodegradable. Biodegradable can be degraded by decomposers, while non-biodegradable cannot be destroyed by decomposers. And this is going to affect marine life, as we can see in the middle picture. And I'm sure you all have heard of the damage it causes to sea turtles, for example, where they think that the plastic is jellyfish, so they try to feed on it, and then it's just a plastic bag, so this could cause death to marine life. And now we're going to be looking about agriculture runoff and oil spills. So what is agriculture runoff? We mentioned before that the use of excess fertilizers and pesticides can cause also water pollution. This is basically when rainwater falls, it can wash that excess fertilizer and pesticide into rivers, lakes, and streams. How does this affect marine life? Okay, so we have to understand how it affects marine life. So we mentioned the definition of fertilizers. They are minerals that cause the growth of plants. So when these minerals, which are rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, are going to be washed into the land, it's going to be taken up by the algae. Okay? And the excess nutrients, we call this eutrophication. Okay? So eutrophication is when we have an excess amount of nutrients, and this will cause an excessive growth. Okay? Excessive algal growth, that's why we call it an algal bloom. Now, this excessive growth, they're going to grow so much, so they're going to block the sunlight and they're going to use up all the oxygen, which leads to oxygen depletion. So, if there's no oxygen, the fish and other aquatic life cannot survive. So, the main definition you have to know is eutrophication, which is the excess amount of nutrients which causes excessive growth. Now, the effect of pesticides is that they are toxic to aquatic organisms when they are consumed in high concentrations, and we call this bioaccumulation. And this does not only affect the fish eating it, but it's also going to affect the animal that's going to feed on the fish. Because remember, in food chains, the energy is passed down, so the nutrients are passed down. So it causes food chain disruption also, or food web disruption. Okay? And also contaminated water may affect human health if it is used for drinking. Now let's look at oil spills. So oil, remember, if we have oil and water, oil will always float on the surface of water, and this will form a layer above the water. So if we have a layer above the water, it's going to block the sunlight from entering, and this will cause harm to both the marine life that's found on the surface and underwater. How is it going to affect the marine plants, for example? So since no sunlight is being able to pass through the oil, if there's no sunlight, that means we have no photosynthesis, so they're not able to produce their own food, and this will eventually disrupt the entire food chain or the food web. Also, birds and mammals, as we can see in the animation, that oil can cover the feathers and fur, which causes loss of insulation and buoyancy, which eventually leads to hypothermia and death. So, we talked about air pollution, land pollution, and water pollution, and we saw the dangers of all these types of pollution. So, this takes us to our next point, conservation. Why does conservation matter? It's very simple. So, since we saw the negative effects, this directly tells us that we need to do something about it. And this does not only stem from governments, but it always starts from us as individuals and then moves on to governments as a whole. So, what can we do? So, we can first clean and treat waste. So, we talked about the water pollution, such as oil spills and sewage treatment and disposal of sewage into water, streams, lakes, rivers. Instead, we can, whenever we have an oil spill, to clean it up. Before we dispose the sewage into water, it's important to treat that sewage to make it clean, to prevent the disease and to prevent water pollution. After it goes through a process of cleaning, then it can be disposed into the water. And this, of course, will reduce harm to marine life and keep water sources safe. Next is using cleaner and sustainable energy. So we saw that the main source of air pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. Now, why do we burn fossil fuels? We burn fossil fuels in order to get energy. So to let factories to work, to vehicles to work, okay? So that's why we burn fossil fuels. So instead of burning fossil fuels, let's look at a renewable source of energy. Remember, we talked about we have two different types of sources of energy. We have non-renewable, which we cannot keep on making. It will eventually get depleted, and we have the renewable source of energy, such as sunlight, solar, we have wind turbines. These are all renewable sources of energy. So it's important to move to that direction. So replace the fossil fuels with solar, wind, or hydropower. This will cause less air pollution, so we're going to have healthier people, and we're going to have reduced global warming. And then finally, emission control and recycling. So we control the emissions, that is, by the cars, by using cleaner fuels and installing filters also in factories and in vehicles. Also, recycling. So one of the main factors also that causes land pollution is the disposal of waste. So instead of allowing waste to build up, it's important to recycle what we can, to reuse also what we can. So it's basically just simple actions such as sorting the waste, reusing materials, and reducing consumption can make a big difference. And that takes me to my point where we said that conservation starts with us as individuals, and then it will go on a larger scale to governments. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed the video, you learned something new. If you learned something new, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and see you soon.